First and foremost, I want to say good evening and welcome to everyone, and thank you to everyone for being here this evening, and also to our amazing administrative team that's here. Have been through so much the last couple years, and still here, still very excited and supportive, and just want to thank all of them. Also, I know specifically our OSEA president, Darla Black's in the room, and I want to thank her for being here this evening as well. Really appreciate your time. With that said, just quickly opening remarks. I'll get to my budget message a little later. I wanted to share our mission is clear and more essential than ever. The success and well-being of our students is up to us. We strive to allocate funds to ensure our students have access to rigorous, relevant, and equitable educational opportunities and supports. The past 24 months of navigating a pandemic has changed the landscape of public education, making our work that much more essential. I will reference in my budget message in a few minutes, but I want to specifically recognize that we are here in person this evening, and our community continues to transition through this pandemic, and specifically pause. Again, thank you for all who are here, and I know we have a couple that are online as well. Really appreciate the time, energy, and effort. Again, later this evening, you will see some exciting investments and, unfortunately, some of our fears related to funding. Through it all, we will remain committed to providing the education our students deserve and an intentional, unapologetic focus on equity. As a district, we will work to provide our best each and every day for our students we serve, and will work with intentionality to implement our strategic and equity plans to improve our student outcomes. We cannot do this without you, each one of you at this table. Specifically, we have to have a budget. We have to have an approved budget through this process. So thank you. Thank you all for your willingness to be here and your support. Once again, welcome, and thank you for your commitment. Back to you, Chris.
So folks here should have had access to the April 29th, 2021 Budget Committee meeting minutes. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, so having been moved and seconded, do we approve the April 29th, 2021 Budget Committee minutes? All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, then the minutes are approved. We'll move on to the election of a new presiding officer for this Budget Committee, and if we need one, an alternative. So I'll open the floor to nominations. Don't all jump to the front first.
I'll jump in and nominate Chris to stay as being chair.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
I'd like to invite any other nominations. All right. Well then, it's been moved and seconded that I be the presiding officer. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
And no abstentions. Then we will proceed to discussing the duration of our meetings. So last year, I think we were able to accomplish this through the first night meeting and then having some time for comment in the second meeting, and we were able to approve the budget in our second meeting last year. The year before, I think we went through 3 meetings. So I'd like to hear any discussion the members might have about the duration of the meetings this year.
I'd like to keep it to 3 hours tonight, unless we're almost done, ready to make a decision at that time. So I'd move that we keep our meeting to 3 hours, which would make it at, about 9:40.
Okay. Anyone take issue with that idea? All right. And I don't think that requires a motion, does it? No. So we will get out of here by 9:40 tonight, and we can determine the length of our next meeting if we need it. So at this point, I'd like to hear the budget message by Superintendent Richardson.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. This evening, I present to you the recommended operating budget for the David Douglas School District for fiscal year beginning July 1, 2022 and ending in June 30th, 2023. As required by Oregon budget law, the proposed budget is balanced between total resources and requirements, We based our 22-23 budget on a proposed budget allocating $9.29 billion to the state school fund budget. This message and accompanying documents are presented in compliance with revised statutes Chapter 294, ORS 294.403, 294.408, and 294.426. As we meet tonight, as I said earlier, we were able to meet together in a room and engaging one another. The past 2 years have been challenging for staff, students, and community, and I just want to recognize everyone for all of their work and ultimately perseverance through this time. We are keenly aware of our students' social and emotional wellness as well as their academic needs. During this time, our district developed and began implementation of its strategic plan and equity plan. Our district's strategic plan focuses on 4 guiding principles of ensuring safety and wellness, cultivating connections and relationships, centering on equity, and innovation. The strategic plan has 4 areas of focus. 1, diversity, equity, and inclusion. 2, communication and family community engagement. 3, health and well-being. 4, highly effective curriculum with instruction focused on equity and empowerment. During our budget preparation, the district held community budget meetings and completed a survey of staff, students, and community to gain input into this year's budget. As you read the budget, you will see investments in key areas of equity, academics, and wellness. We bring this budget to you as part of our compliance and following local budget law. As we drafted this budget, additional funding came available for summer programming as well as educator recruitment and retention. We anticipate that this budget will be modified to address those as well as other opportunities the district may invest in. The state once again underfunded education, raising the biennium state school fund to only $9.3 billion. The state has seen an economic boom and has projected that there will be a kicker in the next biennium. The state has seen a significant decline in the enrollment and average daily membership weighted, also known as ADMW, for students. The state school fund was based on 708,990 ADMW for the 2021 state school fund estimate. And the 22-23 state school fund estimate is based on 681,216 ADMW. Because the number of students attending has declined, the amount of state funding per ADMW has increased. Our concerns are that the state school fund is not keeping up with inflation and may not see increases in the future years to not only cover inflation, but also provide for investments. The state forecast assumed a local revenue increase of just under 3% statewide. This amount has fluctuated for our district's tax revenue from around 0.25% to about 3.5% over the last several years. The percentage of the state's budget funding K-12 has decreased over the past 17 years. Additionally, funding through the Student Success Act, also known as SSA, passed during the 2019 legislative session, is supported by a corporate activity tax. The district has not yet gotten its allocation for the student investment account, but expects to see about the same amount of funding for the 22-23 school year as it did for the 21-22 school year of about $7.9 million. Our SIA plan was based on community engagement and input and can be found on the district website. A summary of what will be funded in the plan is below. The district maintained its investments in early childhood education, including preschool programs, full-day kindergarten, as well as music and physical education programs throughout the K-12 system over the years. The district continues to seek opportunities to expand preschool opportunities, and in this budget, you will see the addition of an administrator to help with that expansion. The district plans to offer a full complement of athletic and other co-curricular activities, as well as advanced placement in college courses. In developing this budget, we strive to keep our commitment of providing educational opportunities that will allow students to learn, grow, and thrive. However, due to enrollment decline and in turn revenue decline, there simply is not adequate funding to fund every need, and without the student investment account, many programs and services would have been eliminated or reduced. Our elementary and middle school athletics are supported through the student investment account, which gives us an opportunity to provide them for free, but it does limit the number of students participating, as an example. As part of the strategic plan, we are investing in school psychologists, social workers to help with student health needs. We have added some funds to help support our previous equity investments to provide for more collaboration time. The district has been working and planning for balancing this budget since the beginning of the 21-22 school year. our district has experienced a decrease in students over the past 7 years, and as we project forward, we are planning for another enrollment decline, as the chart below demonstrates. During the last 5 years, our district has seen a significant decline in enrollment. In looking at our October enrollments from October 2/15 to present, our elementary school enrollment has declined by about 1,154 students, a decline of nearly 880 ADMW. For poverty in 2014-15, the projected 22-23 ADMW, I skipped over, I apologize, I got lost there, declined about 371 students. And our high school programs enrollment has declined by 513 students. Our district is also continuing to see declining birth rates, which means that future years will also see a decline in enrollment. Our ADMW, average daily membership weighted, also has been affected by a decline in poverty. David Douglas School District saw a decline from nearly 880 ADMW for poverty in 14-15 to the projected 22-23 ADMW of 341.68, a decline of 538.32 ADMW. The 22-23 budget anticipates an additional decline of ADMR, average daily membership resident, and a small reduction in poverty ADMW. This decline alone would be an estimated $6.2 million to the district. Our ADMW has declined by just over 3,357. If we had this today, we'd be seeing an additional $31.9 million in our general fund budget. Because the state school fund formula tries to mitigate a sudden change in funding, our ADMW for the state school funding for 22-23 will be based on the projected 21-22 ending ADMW. We anticipate we will continue to see our resources decline along with our enrollment in ADMW in years to come. Until our ADMW plateaus or increases, we will continue to need to reduce our requirements to meet diminishing resources. The district's 22-23 proposed budget is $243,953,365, with the general fund making up $139,276,626. The general fund budget attempts to take reductions in areas without creating a reduction in force or compromising our operations, such as maintenance and transportation, while taking into account prioritized programs. The budget reallocates funding to some areas which represent additions, while taking reduction in other areas. These additions are intended to align with and fund our strategic and equity plans. The general fund balance has increased due to the reduced spending due to the pandemic. Some budget highlights, and again, these are just highlights. There's many other moving parts that we'll get to. Budget highlights, example, we have math adoption for elementary, middle, and high school in this budget. We have 9 FTE elementary vice principals to roll out for our restorative practices and supports at our elementary level. I mentioned 5 FTE school psychologists, 2 FTE social workers, 1 FTE preschool administrator, 1 FTE English language arts toast assignment. The student investment account will allow us to maintain the following: 19.39 FTE of elementary teachers to help with class sizes, 29.75 FTE elementary instructional assistants for support, 14.5 FTE for counselors, 4.33 FTE for middle school and health teachers, community sports and community recreation programs, SUN programming, instructional assistant training. The proposed budget is balanced, assuming a contingency at 5%. Looking for options, so the David Douglas School budget was constructed with the following objectives. Looking for options to control spending during the 21-22 school year, ensuring that we maintain health and safety standards to assure a proper learning environment for when students return, focusing on minimizing staff and budget reductions based on the district's focus on student performance, and continuing to focus on student achievement goals. I would like to thank all staff for their efforts in preparing the 22-23 budget, as well as the budget committee for volunteering their time and effort in the budget process. In addition, all bargaining units have worked diligently with the district and their members to maximize efficiencies, preserve staffing and programs, and make positive differences for our children. We have scrutinized the budget to make adjustments to minimize the loss of educational opportunities for our children, protect instructional goals of the district, maintain health and safety standards in our buildings and grounds, and provide reserves for an uncertain financial future. The staff stands ready to assist the budget committee in the process of approving the 22-23 school year budget. We thank the school board and budget committee for your volunteer service to the students of David Douglas School District. You're making a positive difference in the lives of children in our community to ensure they learn, grow, and thrive. Thank you, and we stand ready to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Next, we'll have the budget overview by Pat Komar.
So good evening, everyone. I think everybody can hear me okay. We'll see as long as you might have to talk down a little. So tonight, we're going to go over, maybe not. Come on. The slideshow says no, it doesn't want to talk about budget tonight. There we go. I don't know. I think I did. Doot. Stubborn, a little like me. So we'll go over budget process briefly. So why do we have a budget process? It's required. Does everybody know that the school district is a municipal corporation? Yeah, so that's what we are. And by law, we may not expend money or certify taxes to the assessor without following local budget law. So without that, we don't get to spend money and we get to collect money. So Oregon local budget law under ORS Chapter 294 prescribes the format and content of the budget document. For those of you who have read the budget document, you know it's scintillating reading. It's very exciting, lots of numbers. Legal notices, it tells us what legal notices we are required to put in to notify the public that we are proposing our budget and adopting our budget. It tells us the makeup and content of the budget committee and the content of the budget message. It does ask that we require public testimony so our constituents can come and discuss with us the budget, what they see, what they think, give us their input. It describes the board resolution, which is required to adopt and appropriate the budget. So you often hear us talk about an appropriation. That's an authorization to spend. And then, because everything goes as planned, we have the supplemental budget process because nothing goes as it's planned, and we often have to change the budget. As Ken mentioned in his budget message, we got notifications of additional grants as we're putting together the budget document. We just got another one for Jumpstart for pre-K for this summer. So we will be doing modifications as things come and change. To give you an idea of our budget timelines, we start back in November. We start looking at our different budgets, making decisions, looking at how our spending patterns are going. Then we also engaged our community in budget preparation and questions during the fall and winter. We'll talk about that in a moment. The superintendent presents the proposed budget in April, May, usually late April, early May. Then the budget committee, us tonight, review and hold a public meeting. And then the school board will hold a public meeting to adopt the budget in June. So that meeting also provides for public testimony so that our citizens and constituents can come in and give us their input on the budget. So this past year, we held 8 community budget meetings from November through January. We held them in our 5 top languages. 106 community members attend. We did also survey staff, students, and the community in our top 5 languages. You'll see there that there was 627 respondents, and if you try to count that up, you'll notice that there's more than 627, because sometimes we have parents that are also staff members, so they got to select that twice. What we found from our community engagement results, the highest priorities are class size and health and wellness. We're going to move into the budget committee responsibilities tonight. So again, holding that public meeting, taking public comment and questions, approving the budget, and approving the total taxes. So the fiscal powers of the Budget Committee by majority can specify the amount of the tax revenue, establish maximum expenditures, approve the total taxes, and approve the budget. Again, after it's approved tonight, we'll have a budget hearing in June at the board meeting, where again, public testimony can be received. The board may modify the budget at that time. We've had that happen. Sometimes things happen between the budget committee meeting and the board meeting in June. And again, that all has to happen by June 30th, otherwise we legally cannot spend the funds, we cannot write checks. We'll go over a little bit here on fund accounting and budgeting. So the budget's made up of several divisions called funds. Each fund is made up of a self-balancing set of records of resources and requirements. When we develop the budget, we look at the resources and we try to make a good faith estimate of those resources. When we do that, we then know how much we can spend and we make a good faith estimate. Those have to balance by law. So I need to be cautious about my estimates because I don't want to project too much just because I want to spend more, because if the money doesn't come in, there'll be a problem later. And we do need to look at, all the different factors and complexities in the different funds that may make it difficult to estimate either the resources or the requirements. Funds are classified as general, capital project, internal service, debt service, special revenue. So our proposed budget for the upcoming year is nearly $244 million. You'll see the major components of that are the general fund, followed behind, not too far behind, by the special revenue funds. We have our capital projects fund, debt service, and internal service funds. General fund resources. Where does the money come from for the general fund? When you look at the budget document, you'll notice that the primary components are the state school fund and property taxes. So you'll see there, state makes up 94 million, almost 95. Property taxes at 17.2. And you'll notice there we have a pretty large beginning fund balance. That's pretty abnormally large for us. We have seen lots of vacancies over the past 2 years, and in particular this year. And we've had a lot of ending fund balance roll up. So we'll talk a little bit about the state school fund grant. It's received over a 2-year period. The state's required to give us an estimate by March 1st for the upcoming school year. That estimate won't be reconciled until May of the school year following. So, March, we get an estimate for 22-23 of March of 22. May of 2024, we get a reconciliation for 22-23. So lots of moving parts. There's factors, and you heard Ken mention ADMR for resident, average daily membership, ADMW for weighted. That means that there's some characteristic that the state gives us extra funding for. You'll notice there ESL, IEP, pregnant and parenting, poverty, those are ones that we tend to get our extra funding for. Each one has a little different weighting. That's all in statute. There's also the transportation grant. The district gets 70% of its depreciation and transportation expenditures back through the state school fund. And the one thing that isn't always apparent is the local revenue. So the local taxes that come in are offset on the state school fund. That's part of the equalization of the state school fund to try and make things more equitable around the state, so you don't have a wealthy district and a poor district, so they try to equalize it. And the state school fund is at $9.3 billion for this biennium. It was a very small increase that didn't cover a lot for inflationary factors. And so you've seen probably headlines around from other districts that are doing cuts or getting into their reserves to try and make things balance. This is a little small, so if you happen to have it in front of you, you'll see that our ADM has been declining as well as all enrollment. I'm going to wander a little closer because the older I get, the bigger the numbers need to be. So you'll notice that way back in 2015-16, we were at 10,621 students in our October enrollment district-wide. You'll notice the projection for next year is 8,583. You'll notice the ADMW has declined from 13.8 to an anticipated 10.5 thousand. And mentioned in his message the poverty numbers. You'll see here this is a year later than what was in his message, but 837 to probably 341. And you'll see all those red tickers for the amount of funding equivalent that we would have lost just due to the ADMW decline. So getting into those poverty numbers, you'll hear us talk about the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates Program, or the SAPE is the acronym that you'll hear us say. This data is compiled at the federal level. It's from IRS state level data, SNAP benefits, state and county, and some other poverty data that the federal government collects. Again, a little bit small, so if you have your presentation in front of you, you'll notice that way back when in 2011, the district population was just about 65,000. The SAPE calculation or the SAPE estimator is always a year behind, and it comes out every December. So December of 2021 is December of 2020 data. So you'll see in 2020, almost 71,000 is the district population. But you'll notice that the 5 to 17-year-old population, 11.6, 11.8. And you'll see throughout the years it went up and it scaled back down. Probably the bigger thing is you'll notice the students in poverty. You were at almost 4,300. You're down to 1956. So a pretty significant decline, which explains why those ADM weighting numbers are declining, because this is where the state gets the data. So statewide, the state school fund is allocated based on our average daily membership. You'll see here some comparisons. 2018-19, just about 705,000 ADMW. 2019-20 statewide, little down, just over 704,000. 2021, 709,000. You kind of scratch your head because 2021, we were in the pandemic. That's because the state school fund will always fund you on the higher of your current year or your previous year. I think there were over 150 districts that were being funded at their previous year because their enrollments had declined. What's interesting is with this year is in 2021-22, our March estimate for the current year was at 703,000 ADMW. And if you look at the budget message, it says about 681. And since we've written the budget message, it's actually gotten down a little bit more to 679. So we continue to see ADMW at state level decline. So the good and the bad of that is that we have a pot of money that gets allocated. And when there are fewer students, there's more per student. Yay, right? What we're concerned about and we're being very cautious about is when the legislature comes back next year, will they find us at the per pupil amount? Probably not. They'll probably do a roll-up on the current, and if you get more students, you get less funding. So that's what we're concerned about, is that as students start to trickle back into public education, which we love to have them come back, our funding will decline because the state will not make the bucket bigger. So we've seen in our particular case some reductions in Title I, Title III, IDEA. You will notice in the budget book that in many of those instances, the numbers appear the same or larger. A lot of that has to do with carryover. So there were a lot of waivers because simply things couldn't get done. Funds got allocated, but things couldn't get done during the pandemic over the last 2 years. So we've been trying to get back on track, get programming done, and hopefully things will turn around. But as we see our student numbers decline, we've also seen a statewide poverty number decline. And when we're fighting with all the other states, funding will decline if our numbers decline. And again, I mentioned the larger carryover due to the pandemic. Property taxes have been pretty consistent. When I started almost 12 years ago, we actually had a year, which is mentioned in there, at a 0.25% growth in assessed value. Here we're estimating a 3% growth. You'll see that we've held pretty constant in there. We've been dipped down a little bit there in 2018-19. And so 17, just over 17.7 or 17.6 in taxes being assessed. This is for the general fund. Our compression, we have very little compression here, so we don't anticipate a reduction in our taxes due to compression. General fund requirements. So out of 139 million, almost 111 are salaries and benefits. We are a people-oriented business industry. So when we have fluctuations in funding, unfortunately, we usually have to look at our staffing. So you can see we're not that flush in supplies and materials. Purchase services is just about 13 million. Capital outlay, and some other, as well as we did get our contingency back up to our 5% there. So some of the things that we don't know as we built this budget, our insurance rates have not yet been released. They're scheduled to be released this week for our health benefits for staff. Our fund balance, we put a lot of fund balance out into the budget. That's always a little bit of a risk because you need to have the funding to come through to pay for those programs later. And I'll show you that here in a minute. And again, our contingency is about 5%, so we've been down to as low as 3% in past years. We hope that we can remain at the 5% as we go on in future years. So getting to that comment about fund balance, you'll see our projected resources, less fund balance, 116 million. Our requirements, less contingency, 132 million. So we're about 16 million there discrepant or deficit spending. Assuming that we will have some underspending, we have staff turnover, we have different pricing, although gas continues to go up, so you never know. But you'll see, so there is that 16.6 million deficit there. While the budget's balanced, the revenues really aren't meeting the anticipated requirements. In building our general fund budget for this upcoming year, we used our strategic plan, equity plan, and community input to guide our decisions. As I mentioned, our community input, we really heard about class sizes and maintaining the class sizes we had. We do, again, anticipate an enrollment decline. You'll see a few FTE reduction for class size, but not that many. Strategic plan, focus area 3, health and wellness. We have some additions of social workers, school psychologists, and funding for community ambassadors. Our strategic plan, focus area number 1, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have the addition of the elementary vice principals. We have some school climate teachers and a dean of students to help roll out our restorative practices program. Under focus area 4, highly effective curriculum instruction focused on equity and empowerment. We are adding an English language arts TOSA to help roll out the new adoption. We will be working on a K-12 math adoption, and then we have some funding in there for dual language curriculum and professional development. So we're going to move away now from the general fund, move into that second large bucket called special revenue funds. Just a reminder, special revenue funds are restricted or dedicated revenues. So oftentimes you hear us talk about grants or donations. Those funds are definitely restricted or have specific purposes that are imposed either by a statute or a grantor or a donor. The largest portion of our special revenue funds is our grant funds at almost $86 million. If you've been watching our budget over the years, that's more than doubled. A lot of that has to do with the Student Success Act as well as the federal stimulus. Our Nutrition Services Fund at $6.3 million. That gets our kids fed every day. We have student body at just over 208,000. Our transportation replacement at about 591,000, and our energy conservation project fund at $718,000. The primary components of our grant fund are our early childhood special education program, which is about $40 million. That includes their Medicaid billing, peers, early childhood evaluations, as well as the early childhood special education program itself. Measure 98, about 2.9 million. Title I for 4.2, IDEA 1.9. Arts tax, you'll notice the arts tax is slowly ticking down. Our student enrollment's ticking down, so our funding there is also going down. The Student Investment Account, Student Success Act, 7.9 million for K-12, 9.1 million for the early childhood program. So out of that 7.9 million for K-12, we anticipate continuing programming for community sports, community recreation. Those are our elementary and middle school athletic activities. We're retaining our counselors, retaining elementary PE teachers, retaining middle school health teachers, retaining kindergarten instructional assistants, and retaining SUN programming. The additions or expansions that we were able to do this year, we were able to add more instructional assistants, some in our specialized programs and some for balancing. We were able to expand our elementary sports program, and then we were also are starting a training program for our instructional assistants, as that's one of the things that we've heard over the years is that, well, when we hire, we kind of throw them in and they need a little bit more training to be more effective in the classroom. For our ESSER funding, we anticipate spending about $6.3 million out of ESSER 2. That pays for additional custodians. We will continue to buy PPE, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, all those fun things for students and staff. We are doing an HVAC project, and we do have air purifiers in classrooms, and so we are continuing to buy filters and change those out often. We have our online school program that we started this past year. We do fund an additional nurse and the English language arts adoption. For ESSER 3, the district was allocated $29 million. That goes until September of 2024. 20% of that, about $6 million, needs to be used for learning loss. We have about $12.3 million in this next fiscal year. So we've got that HVAC project. We've got a summer school match in there. We'll move on to debt service. So debt service funds are used to retire outstanding debt. We have two funds. So let's see here. We have the PERS outstanding. So we do have a PERS side account. Those will be retired here in about, I think, 6 years. But we do still assess an amount on our payroll to pay off these bonds. And then we have our general obligation bonds. And so you'll be assessing an amount tonight to send to the tax assessor, or certifying amount to send to the tax assessor to pay off those general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds pay for our capital projects. So when we sell those general obligation bonds, they normally go into a capital project fund. You'll see that there's 3 that fall into capital projects. We have the actual capital projects fund. That's been closed. We've spent all the bond proceeds from 2012 and got our projects done and got a few extra done. For those of you who know, we are looking at going out for another bond. So depending on how the economy looks and things look, you may see that fund come back here soon. We have the Capital Reserve Fund, which accounts for capital projects from other sources. That primarily used to come from our Deerdorf property rents, which we no longer rent, and then also from usage of our field and stadium, which I don't believe we've had any revenues from that in a while either. We also have the Construction Excise Tax Fund, and so we do assess a construction excise tax, and the district receives funds when there are projects. The city assesses those projects, and the funds flow to the district. Those particular funds are limited on what we can use them for to our facility plan. So again, you'll see here we have a very small capital reserve fund, just under $200,000, and we have construction excise tax of just over 1.3. internal service funds. So these funds provide services to other programs within the district. They're usually charged back to the user. In prior years, you would have seen two funds, insurance fund and reprographics and postal service fund. The insurance fund was depleted this year. So the cost of claims and deductibles are now budgeted in the general fund. And you'll find that again in program 2520. We still have our print shop and postal that we do charge back. Whew. Questions?
I have a question. So I just wanted to hear, since the numbers for the MDMW aren't out yet, how do you estimate for next year?
So we do a little trend analysis for next year. We look at what our cohort retention is. So typically when kids matriculate, how many actually go from year to year, from kindergarten to first to second, et cetera. So we look at that. And then we do the same with our ADMW. We look at what type of attendance has happened. What do we typically see as kids matriculate? In a couple years recently, we did see kind of flip-flops where we would see usually elementary increase over the year and our high school decrease towards the end of the year. And we did have a year or two there where that actually flip-flopped on us. So
I noticed as I was looking through the budget, it looks like it's a textbook year.
it's a textbook year.
What is the cycle for textbook replacement or acquisition?
So there's a 7-year cycle, I think. Brooke.
Okay. Another question I had was about the poverty numbers. So obviously there's the sense that when poverty numbers go down, that's generally a good thing. But for the district, obviously, falling poverty numbers has a tremendous impact on budget. I was just wondering if there's any insight into why those numbers have shifted the way they have.
I think part of it is due to gentrification in our district. I know that when we've talked to PSU does some of our projections, and when we've talked with them, they've been a little surprised at how fast things have turned around. They expected a few more years out than what happened. I think rising rents in the area have kind of pushed folks out. I think perhaps some of the past administration fears of the previous president might have encouraged folks not to apply for benefits or to leave the area. You have something?
So part of that just might be sort of underreporting based on people not engaging in services and those sorts of things. Okay.
Yeah. So like we currently are on the community eligibility provision for our meals. And actually we're on a waiver, but we are approved for the CEP for food service. And that's presenting a bit of an issue. We actually had a meeting with the state because, they normally use free and reduced lunch numbers, and you get that by direct certification, which is how they get the SAPI information. But you also get that by self-reporting. Parents were required to fill out a form. With the new program at the state level, the assistance for us to get more kids into the meal program, you no longer collect that information and you no longer can require that information. So that creates a little conundrum. It also creates a conundrum for like Title I funding, because that's how things are based. So they're kind of trying to figure out how do we come up with those numbers so we're more equitably allocating things where they need to go.
Is the SAPI, does that include TANF or just SNAP?
I think it's just SNAP.
Okay. Well, I happen to work for DHS, and I know that our caseloads actually went down during the pandemic because people were getting pandemic benefits, and so they weren't going through the usual process. And I'm wondering if that is showing up as well in the numbers of like poverty. Like, are we taking that into consideration, the way people were accessing benefits or not during that time?
Yeah, that I would need to research.
Yeah, because I know, at least from working with Oregon Food Bank, I know that there has been an increase of people who are hungry, but a lot of folks, especially in immigrant communities, are afraid to reach out to get resources because of a misunderstanding with the new law that's kind of making people really fearful. And so I feel like both of those things are probably having something to do, which is really scary because people are obviously still in need of support.
I'll just add a comment to that, just because I work with the housing issue in the areas. We actually, based on East Portland Action Plan on our housing, is we're seeing a greater need through the foundation, through the food banks with the pandemic. I saw a huge increase in the food banks in our district. So I think our poverty level actually has gone up. It's just not, they're reporting in the way to grab the numbers. So therefore, they show us going down and stuff. Earlier, prior to the pandemic, I would say it was a little more displacement. Now, I think we still have the poverty, we have the displacement, and it's all combining together.
I have a question about the social workers, the 2 social workers added. How do you envision that being actualized? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So what we currently have 1 social worker within our district that focuses a lot on attendance and supports and wraparound services. By having 3 total, then what our intentions are to kind of have those matriculated through. So if you think about catchment area with elementary to middle, that's kind of what we're envisioning now, having 3 where our catchment from elementary to middle all the way through. Each one has a social worker to help with that. 1, attendance, but then 2 also just supports and wraparound services.
Again, DHS day job. One of the things that I know that we're working on is a POP for 23. That would be not this budget, but the next one, to actually work with schools on developing a model like that. And so I think while it shows up here in our budget, in future years, maybe there's a way that we can partner with the state, with some other districts, even in a pilot, because I feel like that's a direction that the agency wants to go. And if we're already starting it and doing it, that might be a great partnership in future years.
Yeah, I love it. It'd be great. And we could actually use more than 3, to be quite honest. So the hope is we continue.
Question.
Go ahead.
Just curious, are there certain pots of money that have been catalysts for programming that we are finding that are helping to stabilize certain communities that we know eventually will go away, such as federal dollars because of the pandemic, that we're saying this is like a but-for, very linchpin program that we'd love to find funding to maintain that program beyond kind of its initial inception from the pandemic funding we might have received?
Yeah. So specifically, we're trying to stay away from that extra funding, if you want to call it extra, or support funding or bridge funding around any kind of staffing because of that, right? So we're looking at more one-time costs and one-time specifics, but I can tell you right off our hand, we have our online program. Pat mentioned our online school, excuse me, not just program school. That's funded out of our ESSER dollars. So, you know, we're hoping that we can lift that up and continue to show how that pencils. Our summer programming specifically is out of funds that have been given to us both from the federal government and ESSER and also the state has come together. The state one, actually, they're communicating that might be a forever. We might get that year after year, but right now it is kind of two-time funding. We did it last year, they did it again. So 3 of those are all examples of programs that right now we're reliant on this added funding that we know will go away.
One of the things I've seen just in terms of my own children, you know, we had a year and a half or so away from school with remote learning. Coming back to school for students has been challenging in many ways, but part of it is just there's a, for lack of a better term, a developmental delay. Socially, they're a year and a half behind where kids normally would be. I know with one of my daughters, there's been difficulty getting back into the swing of school, where a very bright girl is still very bright, but she just has trouble with the school portion of school. So do we feel like we're continuing to adequately address those needs and resource dealing with those needs among our students?
Yeah, so adequately is an interesting concept. The reality of that trauma, the reality of, right, you know, I could go all the way back, and I'll just get my plug in here, QEM, Quality Education Model from the state. Truly, if we were funded at that level, we would have a lot more funds coming in, which that is the baseline that the legislature basically said, this is what Oregon schools need, and we don't get that. So there's still need. With that said, I want to, Pat, hand me a little note here. This year, the high school also hired a social worker. So you were talking about social work, Stephanie. I was just talking about the 2 that we're adding for the 3, but there's also one at the high school level specifically. But now that is some of the intentions. What I think you're referencing, Chris, is our school psychologists and adding the school psychologists. Part of that is freeing up counselors. A lot of what the counselors are doing, the school psychologists now can take on and add support and capacity, which frees up a little bit of our school counselors. And then also the specifics of our administrators to help with that restorative practice, specifically at the elementary level. So the intention of adequately, we know there's needs. We know there's still needs. And that transition back to school from being offline has been great on days and bumpy on days, to be absolutely transparent. One of the things we did last year, and we'll be presenting to our board team, is we did a soft start, kind of a transition start last year that provided more time for each grade level. And our intentions are to do that again next year, really spend time with students on how to be a student, spend time with students where they really get time. So if it's only 6th grade in our middle school, that's the only people that will be in the middle school for a full day. So we can really help them transition, have conversations. And same thing, only juniors will be there to have those conversations. So we're planning to do that again as one of the strategies. We did it last year. So there is still need for that, and there's still areas that we can definitely improve.
I do think that was, to complement the school district, that was a great success. I had daughters who were entering new schools, both of them this year, but into the 2nd year of the typical program in the new schools. And so the attention that was paid to making sure the transition was smooth and didn't ignore those students was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. It's because of all of them out there, but thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely.
Pat, can I ask you a really super basic, I don't really understand budgets question?
Okay.
Thanks. I just want to make that very clear. On page 3.2 with the financial summary, so the $10 million increase between last year and this year, or next year, is that the money we're getting, or is that the money we need to spend?
So when you're looking at the general fund?
Just a financial summary, all funds, $233 million this
43.
year, and then $243 million next year.
Yeah, so you'll notice that primarily the increases are in your general fund. So again, we have a bigger ending fund balance. And you'll see your special revenue funds go from 91 to almost 93.3, 94. The biggest component of that increase is going to be in your grants. There's about $2 million more in grants. There's about $8 million more in general fund.
So the general fund, is that what's coming from the state then? Or is that just
Well, the
funding
general-
from lots of different sources?
So the Go to page 4.2. And you'll see the general fund resources there. You'll see that there's a small increase under revenue for local sources going from about 20.2 to 20.4. You'll see there's a decline in intermediate sources. Again, our enrollment declined. Most of that money is transit from the Multnomah ESD. You're going to see an increase under our state sources, a couple $1 million, from 92.3 to 94.7. But you're going to see a very large increase down there under beginning fund balance, 17.5 to 23.2. That's all that underspending, lack of staff.
Okay. So the state's kicking a little more money down, but it's not what we're hoping that they're going to kick down.
Yeah, no, the state's not giving a huge amount of money on a per ADMW number. The general purpose grant went up, but because our ADM is down, right? Comparatively, we would be getting more money if our ADM had stayed stable.
Okay, so it's not enough basically to keep up with inflation, cost of living, all that.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the big caution that I talked about before. Is right now we've incorporated that any fund balance in there to spend. So again, you're about $16 million deficit.
Next year?
Yeah, just to start the year.
Oof.
And that's assuming we spend everything, which generally we don't spend contingency, dip into contingency. Generally revenues haven't changed. You know, when we met a couple years ago as the pandemic started, there was a mass panic that the bottom would fall out and revenue would plummet, and just the opposite would happened. I mean, they have so much money, you know, none of it's coming our direction, but they have so much money at the state, they're projecting kickers for years to come, and yeah, so it's interesting.
I was going to ask this a lot later, but since we're on the topic, like, where are we looking to find that extra money if we don't have it? I mean, we'll have it next year, but we won't have it the year after, is what you've been kind of warning us about for the last couple of years. So where are we going to be finding that in our budget?
So that's going to be kind of our issue is, does the state increase the funding and meet you heard the QAM model. We've met with some resistance in the past at the legislature, especially during the pandemic, with I don't know if it's distrust on how school districts roll up their numbers. There seems to be a lack of understanding of how the PERS bond impacts school budgets. So if you have a PERS bond, you're assessing some extra against your salary. That goes in to pay for your PERS bond, and they say, well, your rate decreased, so you shouldn't need as much. But they don't look at that actual amount that you're collecting to pay off the bond. So, and there's some other things where there's been some discrepancies with how they roll numbers up versus how we look at it.
I think it's also particular to David Douglas in that, other districts aren't in this perfect storm of, the per student, we have enrollment declining, we have gentrification happening, right? So we have less of that extra money, both at the federal level and the state level. So that isn't happening in every district the way it's happening here. We're just sort of getting squeezed in the middle. We're that middle class kind of rising district. We're still quite poor compared to our neighboring districts, to the west, but it's a particular Douglas problem. And I don't think that as legislators are looking statewide, they're seeing the same thing happen here that's happening like at other places, and they have to look at the whole state. I think that's part of it too, just in the conversation. Ken's like, I
We
don't
are,
know if I
we
agree with
are
your
a
analysis.
unicorn. We are a
we can arm
unicorn
wrestle
though,
later.
and they do watch us. I will tell you
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, definitely we're a unicorn. What you just said all lines up, but I can tell you one of the fears that the entire state has is if you have 700,000 ADMW that goes down to 680 ADMW, you have less
Kids are
students,
coming back.
You have less
Yeah,
need.
yeah.
You don't need as much money. Versus no, we need the resources now more than ever. Our students and families need the supports. We need those services more than ever. We're doing more in our schools than we've ever done. Right, the mental health supports, the trauma response, all of those are on top of language arts, math, right? So the reality is, although I agree with you, Stephanie, part of it is statewide. There's this worry that, hey, your statewide enrollment's going down. You don't need as much. We don't need to give you as much. And we're always fighting every biennium to say, just to argue where the current service level is, just to say we need to roll up, just to open our doors every year, there's a cost, right? Just to run those buses every year, there's a cost. Just to have these lights on every year, there's an increase. So we talk to the state every year, but basically for sure every biennium, say, look at our current service level, and we're fighting just even there, when really, in my perspective, we should be looking at investing in our schools, investing in our district, investing in our students, and that's the conversation we're having with our legislatures every year. I mean, it's not just a biennium. We're lobbying now and having conversations now that basically, hopefully, are impactful, hopefully make a difference.
100% Ken, and we need to fund the quality education model. I was just basically saying we're kind of a canary in the coal mine in that everything's happening in Douglas all at once. That was my only point.
Well, there's also discussion because we are kind of unique to Portland, and I'll say to Portland, is that we've had push through EPAP, through our legislators, that they need to look at East Portland as a rural area because we have a lot of the same issues rural areas have. We don't have the same issues that inner Portland has. Ours are more aligned with what the rural areas are hitting. But I do have several questions. But just clarification, because you mentioned the PERS bond. When we pay that off, and she said about 6 years, that means that money is now available in our general fund. If just that we don't have that bond to pay for, so therefore you aren't charging it as extra payroll costs.
Correct. So we not only assess in the general fund, though we assess our grant funds
Yeah.
because we have staff in the grants, and so yeah, that will come off.
Yeah, okay, I thought that's what it would do.
But that also has a little bit of a what do I want to say? A little bit of a sting with it because when your bucket goes dry in your site account, you no longer have anything to reduce your PERS amount by. So your PERS will go up.
So
Sorry.
what was the purpose of doing it? Really, when you come down to it, if it does that. But I have several questions. One's on 4.4. You have other alternative education, and these are students without IEPs, but they're being in alternative learning experience, and this is just a verification for me. Therefore, they do not get the extra weight, and we are funding that all ourselves.
Which page are you on?
It's 4.4. Other alternative education. You show approximately 100 students are in that budget.
So there may be some weightings in there if the student is receiving like ESL or is pregnant and parenting, if they're in one of those types of programs at an alternative school, but they're not special ed, there's not extra funding.
Okay. And I had, under safety, I think this is just a correction, but I want to make sure it's public correction. It's 4.56. Student safety, it says expenses for one Portland Police School resource officers paid by the city, and I don't believe there's any resource officers paid by the city anymore.
Nope.
So you may want to correct that
Yeah.
since they don't have, because it's a hot button for some people who don't understand what they did in our district and how well they did. That's my pitch. Anyway, and psychologist, back to the psychologist. Pre-COVID, I had an opportunity to listen to a presentation, I think it was through OSBA, where a school was already, we were talking mental health back then, pre-COVID, and that's what got me interested, is there was a school district that was collaborating between their school, nonprofits, and the county to help provide those services. Are we looking potentially with this being collaborative? And also, are these licensed psychologists or licensed counselors for mental health?
So we're specifically looking for licensed psychologists. The additions in that we have, the partnership, we don't have any specific partnership planned, although we do partner with the counties, and if there was some sort of leverage or resource, we could talk about that. We currently, obviously, not obviously, I shouldn't say that. We do currently partner with them on a number of different items in mental health and health in general.
I'd like to see us delve into if there's more partnerships we can do, because truthfully, mental health is the county's responsibility. So, also under 4.68, there's service, direction, support, student support services. It's adding 3 licensed positions, and I was trying to figure out what are those for?
Those are support positions for the middle school.
Those are the school climate TOSAs that I spoke about.
Oh, okay.
I'll
wasn't-
add that information in there.
It didn't show, so I was trying to figure out what they were. I don't want that. Oh, I know, this is one, and I think I mentioned to you before under 4.72, and it's not the numbers, it's more the media services, because we have computer labs in our elementary school. And at National School Boards, I heard about one of the school districts, not necessarily in Oregon, but a lot of school districts had computer labs in elementary, is they're moving away from them and to making more makerspace, and to think of it, makerspaces at elementary to start doing more career technical type at that lower level. And I was wondering, given every child has a Chromebook, so and I know you do testing in the computer labs, isn't it possible just to do testing? And it's something to look into the future. I'm not saying this next budget, but to me, look into, do we really even need computer labs anymore? Especially if we want to push early childhood. It might free up space, whether it be for makerspace or for early childhood. I do listen to some of those sessions I go to. Let's see. Oh, I know. This is 4.116, which has to do with sports services. We're adding a second grant writer.
Yes.
I'm very excited about that. Colleen's been worth her weight in gold, and I think that will really help the district with more. You didn't mention that in anything, and so I thought it should be good to point out and stuff. And then you have translation services. There is 4.5. Are those also our family liaisons? That's on 4.124. I'm just curious, it's for interpretation and translation services?
Right. So
I was wondering if we have family liaison, and a lot of them are multilingual. Are they the same, one and the same?
So we've got our liaisons here that help with translation interpretation, and then we've got some family engagement assistants that are back in 2490.
Okay, so you have both. Okay. And under 4.127 are early retirement. Okay. It seemed to have gone up for the stipend. Did we have?
We had.
It didn't seem like we had an increase in retirements, but.
We did at the end of last year.
Okay.
And so we're actually seeing some of that this year. So we did kind of recast this and look at what the potential was. And I wanted to put in a little bit of a placeholder in case we have a little bit higher resignation.
And we're still doing, it was, it 3 years for stipend and 7 for medical? Is that it? I'm trying to remember. Early retirement.
7, I think, or 65. No,
You're right.
past
So,
65,
yeah.
I think it's 7, yeah.
I think, is it 4
Okay.
years for stipend?
I'm not sure about the 3. Pat's saying she thinks it's 4. I do think it's over 3.
Yeah, okay. No, that's okay. And I helped negotiate. I should remember the year it started. What was the cutoff year? Oh, something?
2006.
6.
Yeah.
So, and we figured 30 years out to, yeah, okay. I'm just curious. Only because I helped negotiate that one. And then last question on 5.7 under grants, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. How many years left in that particular grant? Because I know it goes down each year because they want you to pick up what you do sustainable stuff in that particular grant.
I am thinking we are in our 3rd year of that grant.
Thinking, who does that?
Yeah. Are we in the 3rd year of the grant? We're in the 4th?
Or the 4th year?
Okay.
Okay. And is it with the high school or? Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Greg's
That's all.
hiding back there.
Okay. That's all I have others, but I'll hold off right now.
Could we circle back, Chris, to audience participation?
Yeah. I do note that there was nobody who signed up for public testimony. So I wanted to verify that there was no one who intended to engage in public testimony. If you do, you'll need to sign the list. Okay, thanks. We can return to the questions and answers.
I had a question around the beginning fund balance. I believe when you were sharing it, you talked about it as that stems from our vacancies and salary roll-ups. So just wanted to know if you can unpack that a little bit. I could be onto something, or I could be spinning yarn in my head on this one. But what are the causes of the vacancies? Is it just kind of overall staff reductions? Is Great Resignation have anything to do any of those things? I'm just kind of curious. I know that no industry was immune, but I could be onto something or not understanding that particular fund. I know we shouldn't see it as additional funding. It's not. It's already allocated towards staffing positions that have just yet to be filled, correct?
Well, yeah. So we've had significant vacancies this year. At different points, we've had 100 positions or more vacant. I can tell you that in some cases we've had some, I would say, chronic vacancies. I'll be honest, my department, right now, we have 4 vacancies. We have 1 temporary person in helping. So my staff are running a little bit thin. So when I don't spend for staff, that gets rolled forward, but I'm hopeful that we'll find some staff. Maintenance has seen the same. I'd say something about custodial, but I probably get hit because they're actually almost full right now, and that's not normally the case. So, but we've had problems filling an electrician position for like 3 or 4 years now. We're seeing higher numbers of turnover. We saw, I think, some pretty exceptional turnover numbers at the beginning of the school year with our instructional assistants. And we continue to see that. So you saw that one investment that we're working on in trying to make sure they get training, because that was a consistent thing that we heard is, we hire them, we get them in, and we're like, we have somebody, but it's like, okay, we really need to get them trained to know how to deal with students who, are having some difficulty transitioning back into school, and making sure that they're feeling comfortable in those situations.
Thank you. And also, just to follow up on this, I know at some point, too, with declining students, again, my assumption is that there's going to come this intersection of class sizes, the need for those teachers in those particular positions. Where do we anticipate that kind of that threshold being, where that is a further consideration?
So every year when we build the budget, we look at a staffing formula, and that's where you saw some reductions, I think, at high school. You also saw some at middle school. So we anticipate and try to anticipate that. We also try to look at what our attrition is. Fortunately, for the vast majority of years, I would say, in the last 4 or 5 years at least, that we've been reducing, we've had enough attrition that we haven't actually had to go into a reduction in force. So we try to do a little planning and try to do some gauging, because right now we're even looking at numbers, and we've got a few schools that are even lower than what I project. So we're kind of holding back on that, and so that's again another reason why you've seen that ending fund balance tick up, is if we start getting the sense in the spring, summer that enrollment isn't where we thought it was going to be, then we start, holding back on some of the hiring and kind of reshuffling.
Can you tell me a little bit about credit recovery? I know that we have spent some time looking at graduation rates and, folks that are not on track, kids that are struggling. I know that on 5.22, there's the remediation, summer and night school. I assume that's credit recovery. I don't know where else it shows up in the budget, but it seems like a lower amount than maybe some previous years. And so I was just wondering what we're doing, how we're prioritizing the ability of students to access credit recovery in the next year.
So specifically, I'll jump in while we're pulling up the page, Stephanie, and there's a couple different things. One is we have our budget specifically around that, but then it's also grant funded, and part of our learning loss, they call it learning loss, although we'd like to focus on an accelerated learning. We're required in Pat's communication and her presentation that 20% that we have to allocate and other pieces of that. So, for example, we've already communicated with our administrators that this looks like the amount of money that you're going to be able to allocate for programming that's intended to accelerate learning. I don't know on this page, Pat can jump in and ignore me specifically what's identified there, but I might invite Greg if he has any quick. I know right now they're still in the middle of the planning, right? We said here's somewhere around $1 million that you can be looking at that's on top of your normal programming. What do you think? Some of our elementary schools might be getting up to $200,000 that could help with this process and help with, again, it's not about credit recovery, but it's about supports and added supports. There are some caveats with those dollars. For example, you can't spend it during the day. So it's something that's an after-school type programming, those type of things. But specifically credit recovery, we do have a summer program around credit recovery, and then we have throughout the year credit recovery, and credit recovery is isolated to the high school. Learning acceleration and add back is not, but credit recovery is high school. Greg, do you have anything to add?
That's in addition to what you're talking about. One of the things we did add this year, starting in August, is another section, credit recovery. There's some things that we haven't done in the past. So that first of all, we're we'll offer another area of credit recovery to as well. And then also, we have a recruitment team that we look at, we're trying to go out and see if we find those particular students that need some assistance and some parents recruitment households to try to do that.
That's part of the ESSER 3. Okay, thank you.
So
Appreciate
the 5.22 is grant funding, and then on 4.38 is the general fund portion of credit.
I have a question. Looking at page 4.5, I noticed under technology or under supplies and material for technology and computer hardware, a pretty significant drop off. I'm assuming that line is related to Chromebooks and, and not, we've spent significant funds the past, 3 years on those. Is that just that we don't anticipate needing to refresh those? And then my second part of that question is, what is the life cycle refresh on those as well?
So we actually have a replacement plan for our technology items. Those include not only our Chromebooks, but our teacher computers. And so we were able to get funds through E-rate and get those reimbursed this year. Not quite 100%, but a good portion of them. And so in order to, so for next year, our replacement plan would have been teacher computers. In order to get those in the hands of our teachers in the fall, we decided to pull that schedule up a little bit. And so my technology director made a little deal, and I said, well, if I pull them forward, you don't get the funds next year to spend. So that's why you'll see that decline. And you'll see that go back up when we do the following year budget. So you bet.
I was actually looking at the same page earlier. Is the depreciable transportation new buses?
Correct. So you'll notice in the budget that under programs 2552 and 2558, there were some restructuring. In prior years, we did a lot of cab services for specialized transportation. We do have a new transportation manager, and he wanted to bring those services in-house, as we did have some issues. So we're looking at moving more and more of those services in-house and providing them ourselves. We also need to get a little bit back on track with our bus replacements. We do have a number that if we don't get them replaced by 2025, which is a federal emissions issue, then we won't be able to roll them on the street. So we're trying to get that forward a little bit. We tried to purchase some and got our orders in early this year, and we actually have them pushed out to next fall. We're hoping to get 4 this month and 2 more, I think, in the fall, but they've already notified us. We just recently did a bid. They've notified us it is anticipated at least 12 months to order a bus and then receive it.
And then in terms of bus prices, have those changed like everything else over the last couple of years?
Bus prices have escalated, and they're astronomical. I think the last bus price we had was $180,000 for a large bus. So pretty significant. Small buses have now crept over $100,000.
To give you an estimate, I used to work for a company that sold school buses in the 90s, late 90s, and a large bus was half that price. I have another question. We were talking about our SAP and the nutrition and the community eligibility, okay, program. Do we know if we're going to be part of that program next year?
My understanding is yes, we're part of that program next year, and I believe they actually were supposed to be re-looking at numbers this past month, but I haven't heard.
Okay. And if not, because I remember when we got cut off before, and it was really major pain, a short time frame. Have we learned from that? Do we have some kind of communication plan? So when they do say we aren't in the program anymore, we can quickly make sure those people who really need that program, you know, the free or reduced lunch, that we can make sure the paperwork's done. I just feel we need to think ahead on that.
Yes.
After that last incident. It's a great program, but if it suddenly disappears. Anyway, and then I have a comment about the assistance and the training. And as you know, I like to volunteer in the school, but haven't been able to with COVID. And something I was thinking about when you were talking about the additional training, have we considered, years ago, curriculum department used to do volunteer training that would literally taught how to work with kids, or whether it be games or whatever. It was great because I worked for years volunteering in the schools, and it helped you if you weren't as knowledgeable with that. And a lot of times people aren't knowledgeable about how to work in the classroom. They work with their own kid, but they don't know how to work in the classroom. it would be a great idea. We have a lot of seniors who have felt confined for the last 2 years and really would like something to do once everything lifts more and they feel comfortable, that maybe we can get some more seniors, not just our SMART program, but other seniors in our schools helping raise those kids who need the extra help. Just an idea.
We always appreciate ideas.
I had some questions about the benefits package. I was looking at page 2.7. Am I right in assuming that the number there for health insurance is per month? The 1,272 for a single, or 1,983 for family?
Yes, monthly district caps.
Okay. I was just curious, why are the licensed insurance costs slightly higher than the classified costs?
That was part of the negotiations. And so part of, not the current bargaining agreement, but I believe the one before, there was a request. And so the way that the negotiations ended up, the benefits in the past, prior to that, had always been pretty standardized for all of our groups. But more, I think, wanted to go into salaries, and so that kind of shifted it a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Aaron, since I was part of those negotiations, I was very adamant that they were making this choice. And years ago, I remember Bruce Burton and I really pushed for them to be the same, because an employee was an employee and was an employee. And this was the union's choice. And so I wanted to make sure they realized this was their choice, no longer to be even.
Okay. Thanks. Just so on record, so for a single person, it's $15,000 a year for health insurance per person.
That's a cap.
That's the cap. So that's the total, the amount that the district can pay. But
Correct.
that not necessarily what they will pay then.
Correct. So a lot of times for our single folks, it falls under that.
Okay.
And then the balance of that ends up into that pool. And then that gets reallocated if there's funds at the end in December.
So the cap for families is $23,796 a year, but that's just the cap. That's not specifically what the district's spending per person for health insurance, or is that?
Correct. So the last 2 years, our staff have received 100% of their insurance paid, because what people take, when people take only what they need, and we have a budget based on there's a pool contribution amount in each bargaining agreement. So they max at their cap, but then there's it's very complex. There's my payroll folks don't appreciate me on this particular one, because I'm the one who came up with this, and so it's a little more complex than probably it needed to be. But there is a pool cap. There is a cap based on the tier rate that you fall in. And so we look at, there's a calculation that's done every December based on how many people are participating, how much is the monthly amount for all of that particular classification group. Then we look at what the balance is and whether there's anything that can be reallocated. If folks are thoughtful in their insurance choices, then oftentimes there's more in the pool that gets to be allocated, and you end up with 100% funded insurance.
Oh, okay. So you're saying, like, if my spouse had 100% coverage or better, or a different health and coverage, and then I didn't take it through the district, then that would be a savings to the district that you can reallocate.
That would be a savings,
Yeah,
or
plan.
we have multiple plans. Sometimes people choose the high deductible plan because they can do a health savings account. Sometimes people choose the most expensive plan because that's, what they think they need. And so there's lots of different options for employees. Some take vision, some don't, some take dental, some don't. So all of those factors play into what's left And then that, anything that's left gets reallocated.
But if everything that they take is 100% covered by the district, why wouldn't someone want to take like vision? It's not. So there's like
Right, you have
a
the
cost
cap.
share program.
So the cap is your first stopping point, right? So if I take the most expensive plan, I'm probably at $30,000 if I'm a family. So there's an out-of-pocket cost to me. So I'm going to be thoughtful about my deductible and my out-of-pocket cost for my insurance.
Okay.
So that's the encouragement, to be thoughtful and not just take the highest one. Some folks do really, really well with that. And oftentimes then there's more. Now, as I mentioned, we had pretty significant vacancies. And so that contributes also, because if I'm not paying for insurance, that will contribute to the pool, and the pool will be able to pay higher.
All right, thank you. I had a few more questions, but I noticed on 3.2 that nutrition services is projected to be down 200,000 next year. Is that just because we're not sending as many take-home meals, or what's?
So part of it is the take-home meals, and part of it, if you go back and look, the staffing is declining. Again, declining enrollment, don't need as many people to do service. But we are concerned about all the waivers. I don't believe any of them have been re-upped for next year. So the meals that have been going home now will fall into the old categories, and going back to, you need to be present when you're eating the meal, they'll have to be clicked, those kinds of things for accountability.
Oh, really? So they're not going to be sending the breakfast home anymore next year?
At this point in time, I don't believe that waiver's been approved at the federal level. They let them all expire, is my understanding, and there's some negotiations going on.
That's interesting, because my boys eat their breakfast for dinner, not dinner, but they're like mid-afternoon snack for the most part. So I think it'd be better if they ate it for breakfast, you know. And,
But they eat it.
they do eat it. Yeah, they do. They save the milk because I don't, yeah. On page 4.4, I was kind of curious. It looks like the administrative salary, if I'm reading this correctly, is going up 1.2 mil this year, which is a 21% increase. Why is it going up so much? Did we just hire a bunch of new administrators this year? Or
You're
for the
looking
next
at 113?
Actually, 4.4, and this could be a complete
Okay, you're looking at
misread on my part.
You're looking at page 4.4, and you're looking up under salaries and wages under the one that says 113 administrative salaries.
That's correct.
So you'll notice that you're going from 32.6 FTE to 42.6. So again, we're adding those 9 elementary vice principals as well as a preschool administrator.
Okay, I heard you say that, and I just wanted to double check. That makes sense. Yeah, depreciable equipment on page 4.5, is that just the buses that we're taking out of service? There's like $1 million as in depreciable equipment.
Under depreciable transportation. Yeah, so those again are the buses, and part of that's an addition to the budget, and part of that's a realignment of the budget.
Okay. And are we really spending $6 million on textbooks this year? Just on textbooks? I know it's more of an exclamation than a question, I guess.
Textbooks, 2.4 million.
I must have been looking at the wrong page. I thought it was 4 last year and 6 this year, but I'm a little lost as where I found that. So
We are spending about 4 on the English language. So English language, and I think math is our second most expensive, but English language arts is our most expensive. You do K-12.
okay.
So the English language arts, even though we're adopting it this year, we're not paying till the next budget year?
That actually is coming out of our grant funds, and so we're trying to navigate which year it is going to get in.
But textbooks under this 4.5 shows an increase of over $2 million.
Because last year when we adopted it, we had to come back and modify the budget, and we moved it into our federal funds. So it's back in the grant funds.
Okay, but I'm looking at general fund.
Correct.
For
So
the 2
for,
million.
for this coming year, we're adding for the math adoption.
How expensive is the math adoption?
Yeah.
Usually, because I thought language arts was the most expensive.
And math is our second most.
So it's way up there too. Right. Right, yeah, right, I understand.
Yeah. So like we're estimating 967,000 just for elementary for math.
Yeah, I know, I caught that because I thought language arts was up there, but it's even higher.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Another question related to the SIA funds, or student, I don't think I'm saying that correctly. I think you mentioned just in passing earlier that we're using it to retain kinder instructional assistants. If I'm not mistaken, we hired instructional assistants for kinder pre SIA funds, right? Like,
Correct.
Yeah.
And so when we had budget reductions, in order to maintain that service, our instructional assistants at kinder came out of SIA. Then this past year, we've actually added for first and second grades based on a formula. And then we added some at our special classrooms based on a
Okay.
formula.
so is there any indicator? This is kind of a question that's kind of born out of ignorance, but is that are those SIA funds going to stick around? Are they going to be dropping those? It looks like we're using that money to shore up a bunch of holes in our budget. I mean,
Correct.
yeah.
The intention from the legislature is that money continues. How much we get allocated year to year could swing, but the intention is that it doesn't swing, much lower. So the projections now, do we control that? Could things change? Could they just flat say we're doing something different? But as far as, because it was a legislative allocation basically, it's year over year.
Oh, that's great. It's good to hear.
That's
I'm a
the
little
corporate
concerned.
activity
I've heard this concern from other sources too, that the state's using the SIA funds as a reason not to fully fund our educational thing. Oh, you got all this money coming from the SIA, so we don't need to spend extra money out of our general fund budget,
Well, that's been part of the argument. Yeah, the part of the argument is there's lots of money going to education. Lots of money going to education. So yes, just to oversimplify, there is definitely,
Yeah.
we've heard that we've done that. We've added money, but still when you look at it and add it up, it's not QEM. But yeah, there are those conversations there.
Yeah. And the Student Success Act is funded through the corporate activity tax, and that's also seeing a boom. So that's where we're thinking that funding will at least be what we got this year. If you actually looked at the allocation that's out there, it is at like 8.2 million for the district. They did a funding projection over a year ago based on the biennium. But because our enrollment's declining, I adjusted it. So that's why I'm thinking. They just let us know, I think the end of last week, that the estimates should be out in June. Not sure why they can't get them out a little earlier, but yeah, June.
That's
Yeah.
been really devastating. I just have to say, to see like the legislature and community work so hard to pass the student investment account and then to have to not make huge investments. Like we went through this whole community engagement process and we couldn't do what we wanted to do because, you look at that this year, 6 million just in decline with enrollment and poverty and all that. 8 million we get, cost of doing business. Like
Yeah.
we have been filling holes with something that should be, and there's some investments. I'm not going to say that there aren't any, and certainly keeping a level of service is an investment in the future, but it's certainly not what we hope to be able to do with that money.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, I agree.
And that has been a discussion, the ESSER funding. They've been very focused on that. And what's difficult is a lot of those funds are multi-year funds, so you can spend them through 2023, 24. And so we're trying to be thoughtful because we don't know the intention. Part of the intention of those funds were to help with all the pandemic costs. So you're trying to be thoughtful and not spend your $30 million all in 1 year, but then you have the legislature coming back and asking ODE, why aren't the school districts spending all this money right away? And it's like, well, because we're trying to be thoughtful, you're asking us for a plan, which we've brought to the board before, and we'll bring an updated one. But so they're saying, well, you don't need the money because you have all of this and you have this, and so it's a frustrating position to be in because we really should be at QEM. Student Success Act really should be on top of that, in my opinion, because it was intended to make additional investments. And basically, every single school district is using at least part of it to patch together their budget.
Question for, this is one of the budget highlights, which was good to see, but I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit more to the 9 FTE vice principals rollout. I think the thing I'm curious about is, can you share with us a little bit more, what is restorative practices? What is that getting after? What exactly is that? And is that like a training, a set of skills that those vice principals will be required to have in order to be in that role, and how is that assessed?
Yeah, so there is training. Our entire district, so it's part of our strategic plan that we've transitioned into, and actually before that, we received a grant through the federal government, and we've been in contract and moving forward with restorative practices. To be quite honest, all that work kind of paused through the pandemic, and we're rebooting, if you will, restarting, and one of the things in our strategic plan is to ensure that we make that change moving forward, and part of it has to do with how you interact with students, how you interact with families, shifting away from punitive type discipline and more into restorative. How do we educate, right? If someone needs help reading, we educate. Needs help math, educate. Needs help with behavior, do we discipline or do we educate? So it's kind of that new way, and it's really not new, but a different way of thinking and going through a process. And what we want to do is invest at the earliest level so that matriculates through our system. And part of that has to do with adding assistant principals. To be quite honest, that's not the only role. It's to help us with that strategic plan. But in general, the assistant principal just helps with capacity in general, helps with instructional practices, helps with achievement, helps with evaluations, communication, all of those. There's another piece to it I'll add to the layer. Our main focus is restorative practices and thinking about how we're making the shift, so adding that capacity. But we also know in many of the districts around us, they already have assistant principals at the elementary level. So there's a little bit of a competition piece as well, as we stay basically an employer of choice, knowing that resources available for our families and students is something that we were thinking about. We've been trying to invest in assistant principals for a while. It's just now we have a strategic plan that really kind of directs us into funding that plan, and we think this is an essential way to do that. So that's a lot of the conversations. I would turn to Andy, possibly Candy. Is there anything you'd like to add or
Take back there.
provides time and space. Having that capacity, having that position provides time and space for that. Because ultimately, we know many of our neighboring districts actually fund their assistant principals at Title I schools. Well, every one of our elementary schools is a Title I school. So we're kind of putting a stake in the ground around this work and around this transition. We also know there's been a lot more mental health needs. We've talked about it at this table already this evening. The mental health needs and supports and the trauma some of our families have gone through and students. So just adding that capacity is one of our thoughts.
Thank you.
So you're saying that all these new vice principals are specifically kind of geared towards bringing restorative practices into the schools?
They will be
or supporting?
An essential part of it. To be quite honest, all of our schools, we're going to be going through training. For example, this Thursday, all of our administrators or those that can afford to be out of our building, we're still running schools, are be going through a kickoff training again. We have a team going down at the end of the school year, about 40 administrators being trained, 3-day training. Then next fall, part of our rollout for the entire school district will be restorative practices. So every teacher, every IA, we're going to go through a process. It's not just one assistant principal's role or principal role or council role. It's really the entire school, the entire family, the entire community is going to be going through this work. But we know adding an assistant principal, where the job description, if you will, is littered with them being at the front of that and helping with that process. Yes.
Does that mean that the people that you're hiring for that role are people from like the BIPOC community that's sort of spearheaded the restorative justice movement?
Well, yes, no, maybe. Yes, we have a strategic hiring plan. So specifically, all of our hiring, we're looking to diversify our workforce. The reality of what positions are available when you look at administrative licensure, how many applicants are available, where is it at? That's part of our recruitment process. We're truly hoping that as we go through this, when the budgets, if you will, pass, we're planning to get it out so we can start the recruitment ASAP. So the intention is definitely always to diversify our workforce, but we'll be going through a process to post, recruit, then hire. And then in this day and age, to be quite honest, retention's a huge factor. We do have attrition. We do have staff that are leaving us. So if you're saying, will every person that's hired as an assistant principal be a person of color? The answer is no. Yeah, that I'm pretty confident that will happen.
Well, I guess the bigger question is just how will you be gauging whether that person is well versed in restorative justice practices and can actually be kind of like have a really positive influence on the school that way?
So two pieces is the interview process, going through interview, looking at reference checks, kind of where have they been, where are they at, and then the other piece is onboarding the training. So there'll be training for everyone we bring on as well, required training for this program.
This is unsolicited recommendation to that group. When you think about retention, you might already have this factored in, but it might be of great value to keep that group as a cohort, if you will, in terms of what their similar experiences are going through, just to be supportive of one another, talk about best practices, emerging things that are showing up within their respective schools and how they can support one another, manage up, manage down, kind of helping to shift the environment. But just that cohort experience, because they are brought in under this general theme to support them. You might already do that, but if not, just throw that out. I want to throw that out there.
And we are planning that. You bet. The plan is definitely thinking about when we get them on, how do we transition them as a team, a cohort support all year long. Yeah. That's a great addition.
Ken, can I ask a question? It has something to do with what was reached out to me earlier in the year about instructional assistants and bilingual staff, and talks about retention. And so I just want to hear more about I think there were supposed to be more updates after that. So I want to hear a little bit more about, we had a few instructional assistants that left the district because they didn't feel valued, or they were asked to do extra things and they felt like they were exploited in their work, and especially the bilingual staff. And so I wanted to hear what the outcome of that process was.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm going to look to Kelly. Oh, go ahead, Candy.
Candy, is special education instructional assistance included in that? Thank you.
Can I tag on to assistants since we're talking about them? You mentioned the additional assistance is for first and second grade. When we cut quite a few years ago, they switched from having, let's say, so many kids in a class, you got so many hours, etc. And then it became a pool at the school, and the principal could assign as needed, because a teacher might have a slightly larger class, but a class of really well-behaved kids, whereas one with maybe less students could have a nightmare. Okay, so it was, are we still doing that, or is it numbers based? And how many hours are we giving to first and second grade?
So that's formula based,
Okay.
and we have our kindergarten first and second at 6 hours per teacher.
Then they're getting basically full-time assistants all day at all 3 levels, and then the rest of them.
Share.
So it's shared
So
like
it's,
we were
so
doing.
it's a 6 hour for every 2 FTE teachers, I think.
Oh, okay.
So I had a couple of questions under attendance and social work services, so 4.54. There was a line item under grant funded positions that I'm not familiar. It's 21st Century. Is that the name of the grant or the program name? And what does that entail?
So 4.54, so yeah, grant funded positions. You'll notice there it talks about our early childhood special education grant, Measure 98, anything that got adjusted during the year for Measure 98 for next year, 21st Century, and Title I. So we do in Measure 98 have various staff in there. We have some graduation mentors, which are classified positions. We have some social workers. We have a re-engagement specialist, I think is what his title is.
Okay, so the 21st Century is for engagement specialists?
The 21st Century, I would have to look and see what that particular, because it's classified, I would have to look and see what that particular position is.
Okay, yeah, because I haven't, or at least I'm not familiar with it. And then the other question was for that Title I houseless liaison being 0.4 FTE. I know that like eviction and like housing is like a very big issue in our district, so I'm wondering, is that sufficient FTE for this person?
Florence, our McKinney-Vento and homeless.
So if the FTE of less than half time sufficient for the liaison, like are they able to do all their work within that time limit because it's less than part time? Oh yeah, the houseless liaison for Title I.
District level is when there are multiple students in various buildings, and so rather than having 3 counselors reach out, the liaison then coordinates the efforts in getting support. I think the biggest deficit is probably the lack of housing in our catchment area, which I know Frida has been actively advocating for, and including our new apartment complex that's going in on division, actively been reaching out to the principal at West Calvert, who lives here somewhere, and reaching out specifically to our students experiencing homelessness or houseless to be able to get them in there first. So those are the partnerships. So as far as the amount of time, yes.
Okay, and is that through like a partnership through the county?
The housing piece.
Yeah, or the city.
It's specific advocating from people in this room.
Okay.
It's basically, I have connected so that Housing Bureau of Portland through my committee has required their developers to reach out to the homeless liaisons throughout the city. If there's a project being developed, that's how Central City Concerns on 115th and Division has worked with West Powers. But I should inform West Powers, I just found out about 2 more that are coming in your catchment area. One that'll be occupied this fall and one next year, about over 78 units. And then I think the other one's Mill with 169 units for next year. And Florence, I'll get you more information so you can reach out as soon as I have it over the next 2 months.
Thank you.
That kind of brings a question into my mind. As we're forecasting for our district size going forward, we're seeing communities coming in, we're seeing multi-unit housing and that sort of thing. Is that in any way built into the forecasting, or is the forecasting updated in some way so we're actually getting the funding that aligns with what our community is?
So one of the things is when we're forecasting, it's exactly that. It's a projection, just like the budget is a projection. So I mentioned earlier, PSU does a lot of school studies and projections. So we look at that. There's right now, as I mentioned, they've had to do a couple adjustments on ours because they anticipated us growing for a few more years, and we've been in decline. So we look at that. We look at our, as I mentioned, our birth rates and various other information based on cohorts. And we can always make adjustments. And so, like I mentioned, the state school fund gets adjusted numerous times over that 2-year period. So they're always doing data collections. So if we see numbers go up or go down, we can make adjustments. And then again, what we would need to do is, oh my gosh, we're growing. 10 years ago, that would have been our issue is, we planned for this many kids and holy smoly, they all, I don't know, they all came from somewhere. So we saw a huge growth, and we were able to do some budget adjustments at that time. Again, it depends because, the pot's this big at the state, and so the more people there are in the pool, the less water. Fewer people, more water. So, or if you want to think about the Thanksgiving pie, fewer people, bigger pie, bigger piece for you. So.
Frida might have answered this already, and I'm having a hard time figuring out where I found this number, but it says there's $920,000 allocated to student safety, and I'm not even sure which page I got this off of. Is that previous SRO funds, or is that
No, that wasn't SRO funds. Mine was another question that had to do with the verbiage.
Yeah, so we didn't update the narrative on that particular page on 4.56. Every time we read it, it seems like there's always something that we miss. So anyhow, we have not had SROs or school resource officers, and we never actually did pay for them. And so there was a little budget note on that page about we don't actually pay for them. That was something that came from the city, but we actually don't have them, so we'll need to update that particular narrative. The $920,000 there is actually, so part of that is our campus security, so our campus monitors at middle and high school. And then we do have some safety monitors at elementary that fall in this budget also. And I believe this is also our budget where we pay for things like our walkie-talkies for our safety in our schools. So
I was kind of thinking that's what I was going to ask. 'Cause that's kind of going into camera systems too, and walkie-talkies and all that.
walkie-talkies would be here. Camera systems are usually more building related, so you'll see those either under technology has a small replacement budget. And we've actually been talking about, we purchased all of that through the bond. That's already been 10 years ago. It'll probably be 12 by the time we get a new bond. And that's something that we're talking about is what's the replacement cycle for those particular items. So we're starting to see some failures and some things happen, so we'll need to start factoring that in a little bit more into the budget in the future.
So when you're talking about student safety officials, are they sort of like security guards, or do they have different roles?
So we have,
within the school to kind of keep that area safe, or what do they do specifically?
Yes, so we have student management teams, so whether it's titled security, whether it's monitors, student monitors, so we have classified personnel basically allocated to that at both our high school and middle school level specifically. And then at the elementary, there's some, even on transportation, there's time where we have added adults on a bus when needed, depending on where we're at. But specifically, the majority of this budget is our middle school monitors and then our high school monitors.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. It comes more from just maybe a business line of thinking, but with our declining population that we're seeing, is there a current line item that speaks to something, the idea of kind of championing or marketing some of the strengths of the school district as a whole? And if so, like, how does that show up? What does that actually look like, where we can say, articulate, these are some of our strengths, whether it be pre-K or the diversity or the unique programs that we offer that may or may not be as accessible around the city as a whole? Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, so there's not much of a budget other than our amazing communications department. We do have a communications department that has staff strictly dedicated, and then each of our schools has a webpage. Each of our schools have different social medias that we'll use and try to. We've done things throughout the year, everything from creating videos to recruit. We have videos for staff recruitment. We have videos that we've showed students about becoming teachers. So it just kind of depends what you're looking at, but do we have a significant marketing budget? Kind of what I think you're asking. Not necessarily. We do have a communications budget, and there's pieces within that are around marketing, and then we use that depending on where we're at, what format we're in. We'll kind of promote that. Our Grow Your Own program around staffing did a lot of videos this year that they pushed out and advertised. Every year we do videos, not every year, they last for a few years, for our staff in general. We often do videos that we'll put on our webpage for our community to kind of celebrate what we're doing and our strengths, and also to communicate our challenges, where we can get better. Yeah, so.
One thing that has come up multiple times during the year at board meetings is, we've instituted over the last few years celebrations, community celebrations, cultural heritage months. And we've had folks who work with our students from, the Latino community or from, African American community come and say, we're paying for these and we're out of our own pockets right now. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of small amount of funding that we've put in the budget this year to allocate something for those Heritage Month celebrations that we have in the community, because I feel like those mean a lot to our families, and it's the one place where we are visibly showing, our community. And if there's not, is there a way we can slide it in? Because I can't imagine it's to quote, it's budget dust in terms of like how much it would cost, but it certainly would be meaningful if it's not there.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of, it's already currently done through budgeting and our departments, what we have. For example, Kelly many times will take a lead role, her team will take a lead role, so they're already budgeted. They have resources for their time. Obviously, time's pulled away everywhere. The other thing we did add is we added a community ambassador budget. That community ambassador budget specifically for kind of training, recruitment, thinking about how they can be visible within the community. So I think that can a little bit align to what you're saying, Stephanie. The reality for these celebrations, those community ambassadors could be key roles in that, in that training and recruitment piece.
I had a question around the tuition to other Oregon districts. Obviously, that's for students who live in our district who choose to attend other school districts. Is that correct? Before I move on to the next part of my question.
Generally, we place them in certain programs that we don't have.
I was just wondering if that reflects an opportunity to try to, obviously last year the money went down, but last year was also a year where everyone's attending school from home and that sort of thing. But to the extent that it's an expense, is there any consideration in trying to fill some of those needs so that we can keep those students here?
Yeah, so what you're talking about, what that budget specifically Pat's talking about, just for me to frame, is outside placements, thinking about programming that our students need that we aren't currently providing. So just to be clear, traditionally when a student goes to another district, if they get an inter-school transfer or district request and they go through that, they do go to another school. We don't pay them, but the funds do follow students. So just so you know that piece. What you're talking about here, yeah, we often talk about, one, the need for more opportunities, the need for more access for students, and either whether it's one, more programming outside, or two, we have conversations quite often about how do we bring students in? How do we add resources and capacity to our district? So for example, one example of that would be our online programming, our online school, and when we added that, the intention there is we had a lot of students going out. How do we bring those students back? We're offering the same students. Why do you need to go to a certain name charter academy when you can go to our online academy? That was intentional. We also have, we have an alternative campus, which is students go there. Many students just don't quite fit into our high school, so that's an alternative way that they could do that. If we didn't have that, many of those students might be looking for some sort of outside placement. So again, we are often talking about, okay, how do we add more capacity, and or how do we partner with our ESD and our county to look at other opportunities for students and young adults.
Then you kind of got to the other thing I'd been kind of thinking about. In terms of the online academy that we've been spending money on, how is that working for us? Is it successful, or I haven't heard enough about it, which is probably my fault, but it's one of those things where we were looking at it as an exciting opportunity. I just want to know how it's turned out.
Yeah, you can see I'm smiling because I'm very excited about it, but I'm really smiling because we have our principal here and we have next year's principals hired here, and I know if I give him the mic, you're never going to get it back. So no, I'm absolutely teasing. So I'll be first, and then I'll invite Linda and or Shauna. It is being successful. It's being successful. With the reality is that the enrollment, she can give you the specific numbers where we're at. Those students might be somewhere else than they're with us. Is there room for growth? Is there areas we learned and can get better? Is there maybe a bubble? If you think about all the way back to the beginning of this year, how we had a surge, right? So we had an enrollment at a certain place, and all of a sudden the phone started ringing off the hook. So we started out in FTE as fast as we could, kind of to match that. And it has kind of leveled off, if you will, and done this. And we are projecting a little lower enrollment, at least at the elementary level. So thinking about how we continue to build and grow is one of our challenges and opportunities. But I want to turn to Linda and let her brag a little bit. Anything you'd like to add? So just for fun, none of our board members can answer. Does anyone know what the mascot was or is?
Pixels.
Our board member weren't supposed to be excited, but you can see Online Academy, the mascot is Pixels, so very creative.
I have a question. So connecting my day job to this question, so most folks know I do a lot of work around chronic absenteeism, and my question would be, I'm still learning about this on the board level, but is there a correlation to average daily attendance to the enrollment in terms of, in my work, I've seen a lot of 10-day drops happening. I know that was suspended last year due to COVID, but in my work, I've done a lot of home visits with families. And I only speaking to PPS, but I don't know if that's the same thing that's happening in David Douglas School District. But a lot of kids are just not coming to school because of fear of COVID. And so they're just choosing to keep their kids at home, and they're not even enrolled in online school or doing brick and mortar education. And I heard that there was a social worker that works around attendance in David Douglas. I want to hear more about the chronic absenteeism issue in David Douglas, and does that impact funding and enrollment numbers for our district?
So the answer is yes. I mean, attendance is specifically, and enrollment is what we're funded off of. And if students are coming, all of that gets reported, and it ends up impacting the dollar amount. So when it comes to 10-day, those type of things, those are state, and I know you know this well, but that's state law. So we're the exact same as Portland. When we get to 10 days, it's not necessarily that we want someone to go or to take them off the books, is that we're required to because of funding. After 10 days, we can't continue to take money if we're not serving those students. So we do have a system in place where we are reaching out, we're monitoring attendance. It's a regular meeting that we do at basically site levels with the SIT team or site team or leadership team, not site, but leadership team, to kind of communicate who's when, where, how, who's contacted, how we contacted, how we got them back in the school. And again, absolutely transparent. There's many success stories, and there's also families that we aren't reaching. There's also doors that we knock on and we aren't getting the response. And then those students could be dropped. We do have students that we have had success that we aren't ready to come back because of COVID with online. Again, those 380-ish around there, there's definitely some of those that don't want to come back in person. And there's also students that have left, if you will, or not shown back up, and we haven't quite navigated and found them yet. So all of the above is continuing. That's why we want to add support systems to that, so we can have more capacity to reach out to families and help them feel comfortable getting back to school, and giving families some skills to navigate that. You know, when a student is in a position where they're refusing or choosing not to, how do we bridge that gap and support?
And so my hope is that as we're shifting to more, hopefully it sounds like we're moving to a direction where COVID is kind of what we're living with. I'm hoping maybe students are more comfortable coming back. Maybe that would increase our enrollment numbers if we're moving past the pandemic in a way that's more safe for our community. So my hope that's the projection as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely say hope. Anywhere that we can increase enrollment, I would say, while that we don't have specifically to say, here's 300 that we know as soon as COVID they'll come back. I don't think we have it that, it's not quantifiable that way. Most of the students that we've lost, if you will, with enrollment, many of them we don't necessarily know where they're at. Just like the state in general, there's 30,000 students down in enrollment statewide. They don't really know where those students are.
I know where some of them are, but not all of them.
I just have a couple more. You mentioned community ambassadors, and I was trying to find the page that's on, but I couldn't find it. Were those, is it a program, actual people on that one?
Yeah, so what that is has to do with parents. It's through Kelly's division and IDA. So it's more training. It's more opportunities to train parents and community members, support training, maybe stipends, but it's not paid positions.
No, okay, so that was my question. What you're doing is modeling it after what Earl Boyles has done.
Basically, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a connection point.
That's a great program. The other one is on 4.88, risk manager. It's an added management position in fiscal business. So, well, we're having hiring problems already. But what is this management position doing? I know what a risk manager is, but what is it doing in relationship to our school district?
So some of the things that we see this position doing is our hazard communication plan, looking possibly at some of our safety meetings and things which normally fall on myself. Hazard communication plan, yay. chemical hygiene plan. So we have a TOSA that works on that, and I work with the TOSA. So Brooke actually has the teacher on special assignment. But we've had a couple instances with our chemical hygiene plan and OSHA coming in and having some questions. So we're trying to look at ways that we can maybe help strengthen those safety aspects. We've talked about potential COVID protocols and updating those, because those are going to be ongoing as far as probably our communicable disease plan goes. So kind of those are some of the things that we've been talking about to help take things, our emergency safety plans.
And workman's comp as well.
Probably
For
not
issues?
workman's comp.
Not working with that issue?
Probably
Because that
not.
often falls within the risk management area.
It often does. At this point in time, though, it falls under our HR department, and so they've been doing workers' comp.
Okay.
So when it comes to workman's comp, it's investigations after the fact. The risk manager hopefully is the investment up front to have the plans in place so where we don't have those investigations and some of the things happening.
Sometimes with those investigations within business, the risk manager is involved in those investigations. And so.
That's okay. That's okay.
I guess I could ask kind of a sort of a general question, because my understanding of equity is kind of like surface level, and in our opening statement, equity is mentioned several times. So what are some examples of how this budget's been made with an equitable framework, and like what does that really mean in practice when we're talking about how we're spending money this year?
Yeah, so there's a couple different areas, and the key kind of large expenses we'll throw out there. One of them has to do with our assistant principals at the elementary level, thinking about capacity to open up the equity work, the restorative practice work, to make sure we have that leadership, that capacity, the training in general, thinking about both of those are identified within our strategic plan, and our equity plan, they're kind of tied together, if you will. We also added stipends specifically for our equity teams, for trainings. Tay could talk about that and some of the work we're doing around that. The Grow Your Own programming, thinking about specifically, some of it we've already funded, right? Some of it we're continuing, so it's investments we've made in previous years that are going that you aren't seeing eliminated. So it's not just new things this year, which there are some new things, but others are things that we've looked at. So as we sat down as a cabinet, first and foremost with an equity lens, is asking the community, going out, having those open houses, having those listening sessions, doing the surveys, taking that information, trying to put it together. And then second, thinking about what are we doing, what's our strategic plan outline, what's our equity plan outline, and are we funding those? Even the school psychologists, and thinking about the school psychologists, the mental health piece, and making sure that our students have that resource available. And as I explained earlier, that freeing up our counselors, every position we add that can focus on one of those, it frees up throughout our organization for staff to do, have a more laser focus on what they need to be doing as well, so they aren't overwhelmed. So all those pieces are what we're looking at ultimately. I mean, there's some pieces that you would argue, okay, is a new bus specifically equity? And it'd probably be hard for me to reach and say, yeah, that's an equity investment. But getting kids to school is a pretty important thing, and it's part of our operational investment. So, we definitely have operations that you might argue, okay, how does that fit into equity? The big umbrella, I think it does, but specifically investment, it's probably not a quote-unquote equity investment. And then the cabinet in general looks at equity lens, talks about these positions. Each one of our departments thinks about where we're at and what could add to supports that hopefully our dream is anything that we add to the budget adds value to our students and ultimately adds value to the classroom and adds an opportunity for students to learn, grow, and achieve. Yeah.
That sounds complicated, but I appreciate the work. Really do. Thank you. One last small question I got, and it just a goofy one that related back to the SIA funding. What did you mean by elementary schools and community recreation? What is that?
Community sports and community recreation. That's what we call. That's what we've called in the past. Our elementary is community sports, athletic programs, and our community recreation is actually our middle school athletic programs.
Oh, okay. I didn't even realize that there is athletic programs at the elementary program level for my kids. I didn't realize that was an option. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's about what I got.
I'm curious, and kind of following up on your question, Erin, how much of the like funding, if there is any, goes to like supplementing student activities? Like, for example, if there's a student who can't pay for an activity fee, like, is that somewhere in here? Like, that is allotted to supporting students to help pay for that?
So things where students maybe not be able to pay and are looking for more of a scholarship type approach often come through grants and donations, the Foundation's Needy Kids Fund. So every year there's an allocation from the foundation for the Needy Kids Fund. We pay for a lot of glasses for folks. I think we've done some dental in the past, and we do
Well,
things.
the foundation also allocates $3,000 a year for the elementary sports for scholarships. High school handles theirs a little differently than us. And she's thinking of our Needy Kids Fund often is for things like glasses, or a child needs medication and they can't afford it, those kind of things. The counselors, it goes to all, those go through all counselors.
Yeah, and in general, we don't turn students away. So, you know, whatever level it is, if they're trying to access chess club and there's a fee and, you know, for some reason they're not able, we're going to figure that out. We're going to kind of go through the high school specifically in athletics. You know, if someone wants to join basketball and they just don't have the resources right now, we're going to figure that out. So there's not necessarily a specific line item. There's pieces in the athletics budget, pieces in the activities budget, in our foundation budget, but ultimately as a district, our intention, we won't turn students away. Now, the reality is, do we always know? Are there some students and families that aren't coming forward? Unfortunately, I'm sure that happens. So how do we do better to communicate and reach out and bring people in? There's no doubt in my mind about that, but when there's an ask, there's resources, and even if I'm walking down to Pat and saying, we're going to find this, let's figure this out, well, that's what we do.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Ken, because that was going to be my follow-up question. I was like, do people know? Because sometimes I feel like folks don't know, even to ask in the first place.
I agree with that. I think some do. I know some do. I know there's resources. I know there's many people out here, our leadership team, that are paying things out of their own pocket at times, right? Kind of going through a process and help and call it. I mean, anyway, I can go into a lot of different, but the issue is, and when it comes to equity, the issue is those who need it, how are we making sure we're reaching out? And obviously, there's no doubt we can get better at that.
I think there's someone in the back.
Pat, how do you keep all this in your brain?
I don't know. That's sometimes why I need to look that up, because after 22 years of 3 different school districts, I might quote you the wrong thing. So sometimes I'm a little more safe than sorry later.
Are there any more questions? All right, so we come to the crossroads here. Last year, if I recall correctly, due to Zoom, we decided to provide an opportunity for people to get involved with public comment, because we were afraid that due to the barrier of Zoom, maybe people didn't have a chance. I don't know that we're in the same position this year, and so I'm willing to entertain any sort of motions that might be offered by the committee related to the budget.
I would like to put out the motion to approve the budget as presented. I think this time we can see how well the district's done in trying to align it with our strategic plan, our equity plan, deal with mental health, which the board's been really concerned about, and so is the staff. And so I'd like to move to approve the budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the budget that's been presented to the committee. I'd like to take a vote at this time. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
So, Chris, I'll give you this this motion to read aloud, please, and then I think we should take a formal roll call. I'm happy to do that, and I think we have to technically go around twice, so let me hand that to you.
Okay, fantastic. I do recall a script from last year that I was worried about. So. Thank you. All right, so to make sure we have the formalities in place, I'm going to read, do I read both motions at the same time?
I think sequentially.
Okay, so the first motion, I move that the David Douglas School District Number 40 Budget Committee approve the total budget in the aggregate amount of $243,953,365. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor, please roll call.
Tori Campbell.
Aye.
Donna Barber is not with us, and Juan as well. Stephanie Stevens.
Aye.
Chris Pekarsky.
Aye.
Hua Win.
Aye.
Katrina Whittle.
Aye.
Gabriela Saldana Lopez.
Aye.
Mitzi Stone.
Aye.
Aaron Barrow.
Aye.
Carrie Fry.
Aye.
We have a vacancy, and we lost Lisa. She was with us, but she lost the connection. And Frida Christopher.
Aye.
Okay.
I will now read the next motion. I move that the David Douglas School District Number 40 Budget Committee approve the district's permanent tax rate of $4.6394 per 1,000 of assessed value is to be assessed in support of the general fund. A debt service levy in the amount of $5,145,133 is also authorized to service the district's general obligation funds and is accounted for outside the general fund. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
All right. Tori Campbell.
Aye.
Donna Barber and Juan Mayaro are not with us. Stephanie Stevens.
Aye.
Chris Pekarsky.
Aye.
Hua Win.
Aye.
Katrina Whittle.
Aye.
Gabriela Saldana Lopez.
Aye.
Mitzi Stone.
Aye.
Aaron Barrow.
Aye.
Carrie Fry.
Aye.
Vacant seat, and Lisa's not with us. That brings us to Frida Christopher.
Aye.
Thank you.
I don't read the to whom it may concern, correct? That's the part I have to sign? Yeah, okay. All right, well then, we have approved the budget, and we have approved the levying district permanent property tax and bond debt service. At this point, I'm going to announce that the budget hearing will occur on Thursday, June 16th, 2022 at 7 p.m. Will that be here in the boardroom? Yes. Yes, okay. Great. And there is no next meeting date necessary at this point. This is my last year on the budget committee. It's been an educational experience, and serving as the presiding officer has been an honor. I think last year we spent a fair amount of time going around the group talking about how fantastic Pat and Ken have been in terms of not only being knowledgeable about the information they present, but really helping us to understand what we're doing. I want to thank everyone in attendance who is available to answer other questions as well. Just the fact that you're here at this late hour of the night is a testament to how much you care about our kids. And so I thank you all very much. At this point, I'm going to, well, would anyone like to move to adjourn the meeting?
Can I take 10 seconds, Chair Karski?
If you must.
All right, 10 seconds. Count it down, 10, 9, I got to be that guy. So first of all, you said Pat and Ken. It's Pat, not Ken. So thank you to Pat. But I do want to recognize, I don't get to recognize very often the public, in public, and we have many parents here at this table, community representatives, but this administrative team is the best in the state, period. I don't have to say that. I don't get a bonus for saying that. I'm saying it because it's real. We've gone through, as a community, everyone at this table, life-changing events, and they've been here to support and lead our community with their staff. They'll be first to say their teachers, their IAs, their everyone involved, office have been here for students, but the schools wouldn't have done what they've done and be where they're at without this team. And I just want to recognize them formally in front of this team. And I still got like 6 seconds, I'm sure. But lastly, just thank you to the Budget Committee and our board team, obviously being here. It truly means the world that you're here, so thank you.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Let's hear it. Thank you all very much.